CHAPTER VI, Part II, of the Life Story of a Russian Exile, by Marie Sukloff. Translated by Gregory Yaros. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter VI, Part II. The youth straightened up, looked once more at me and the blood-stained snow, and went away without saying another word. Hardly 5 minutes had passed when he came back, followed by a hunchbacked old man. They raised me in their arms and carried me into a house. The warm air and cold water applied to my head brought me to full consciousness. I realized that these poor Hebrews were imperiling their lives. "I must go away from here," I said to the old hostess, who was coaxing me to lie down on their only bed. "But the young man asked us to take care of you," she replied. The youth returned from somewhere greatly agitated, and said that the police were following me by the blood trail, and would probably soon be there. "Oh, oh!" groaned the old woman, and in great terror began to circle about the room. I ran to the door intending to go out, but the woman cried to me, "What are you doing? They will see you, and we shall perish." Suddenly she opened the wardrobe, pushed me in, and locked it. Humiliated and exhausted, I leaned against the door of the wardrobe, not daring to breathe. A far-away noise reached my ear. It came nearer and nearer. I heard the tramping of many feet near my hiding place. My knees bent under me, and I lost consciousness. Late at night I found myself sitting at a table. The room was lighted by a candle. The old woman was whispering in my ear, "Thanks to God! I succeeded in fooling them." I could not understand what she was saying. I felt sharp pain in my head, and my whole body was burning. I cared about nothing, and wished only for quiet and rest. The youth came in, holding in his hands a soldier's coat and cap. They put it on me, and holding me under the arms, led me into the yard. They seated me in a sleigh, with the youth beside me, and we drove away. We rode aimlessly through the city, passing everywhere patrols of soldiers and police. This 18-year-old youth evidently did not know where he was taking me. Bewildered by his discovery, and not wishing to deliver me into the hands of the infuriated authorities, he tried to save me at the risk of his own life. At last we got safely out of the city, and after driving the whole night, came to the town of Gorodnia. In this little town, where the youth hoped to put me on a train, we were stopped by a police captain with a group of soldiers. They took us to the police station and kept us there until a company of Cossacks arrived. I was separated from the youth, put in a closed carriage, and rushed back to Tchernigoff. We came there toward evening. There was no furniture whatever in the filthy cell at the police station where they first put me, and I lay down on the floor. I was so weak from the loss of blood that I could not stand on my feet. A gendarme with a drawn saber stood near me. The door was not locked. For several days I was in a semi-conscious state. I remember only that my cell was always crowded with officials, high and low, who came to look at me. Whenever I began to fall asleep, the gendarme roused me and demanded, "Who are your accomplices? What are their names?" Weak and exhausted as I was, this question always brought me back to consciousness. I knew perfectly well why the gendarme asked me this, and silence was my only answer. This inofficial torture continued for 2 weeks, but the consciousness of duty was so strong in me that all the physical pain and misery they inflicted upon me did not produce the desired effect, and all the subtle contrivances of the gendarmes to wring a confession from me were futile. All that they could think of doing to me was in a vast degree milder than what I had done to myself. My tormentors understood this, and seeing that their inhuman methods did not bring the desired results, they often let me sleep. During these 2 weeks the procurator and the examining magistrate came to see me a couple of times. But as I did not at all think of denying that I had thrown the bomb at Governor Khvostoff, they lost all interest in the case, and conducted the investigation with cold indifference. They did not even succeed in learning my real name, and I appeared before the court as unknown. By not revealing my identity, I hoped to spare my parents the cruel agony for a daughter who must die on the gallows. On the 16th of January, late at night, I was transferred to the military prison, and told there that I would be tried by court martial the next day. At 10 o'clock in the morning, Comrade Nicholai, the youth who was guilty of nothing but not having betrayed me to the police, and I appeared before the military court. When we were led into the courtroom, it was crowded with gendarmes and police. In a corner sat the unfortunate old parents of the youth. They were the only outsiders. The ceremony of the trial lasted about half an hour, because we did not deny the fact, and there remained only to render the verdict which they as well as we knew beforehand. We were offered to say our last word. Note: it is a general practice in Russian courts to allow the accused to address the court before the judges retire to deliberate upon the verdict. End note. Comrade Nicholai rose and said: "Gentlemen of the court, I went openly to fight the enemies of the people. I knew beforehand that for this death awaited me. But the belief that only by this means we can free Russia gave me the strength to sacrifice my young life. And now, before my death, I swear to you, my enemies, that this youth is innocent, and that I see him for the first time in my life." "Gentlemen of the court," said the youth, "I do not ask for clemency for myself, although I do not consider myself guilty. But I beg you to look at my old parents and take pity on them." It was my turn to say my last word, and I rose. "Gentlemen of the court, I swear to you by my sacred belief that Russia will be free, for in this belief I went to my death. I swear to you by the name of the Fighting League, to which I have the honor of belonging, that this boy is innocent. Look at me. I am young, and I love life. I never knew Khvostov, and had nothing against him personally. I went to assassinate him for the terrible atrocities committed by him in the villages, and after he had proved to be a real enemy of the people. I knew beforehand that I should die for this, but the thought of death does not terrify me. I went openly to my aim, and never lied even to my enemies. Perhaps I have only 24 hours to live, and you are the only people I see before my death. At this minute I want to forget that you are my enemies, and as before God I swear that this youth is innocent." I sat down, and the procurator rose and said: "Gentlemen of the court, although the accused produce a favorable impression, I, in the name of the law, must demand a death sentence for all three." After this the court retired to deliberate upon the verdict, and we were taken to our cells. Terror seized me at the thought that they might hang this strange 18-year-old boy. I paced my cell for hours. The sun set, it grew dark, and the judges were still deliberating. Oh, if only they would not hang him! The clock struck midnight. Some one stealthily opened my door. "To the courtroom, please." The gendarmes spoke in a whisper. The corridor was half dark. There was a clinking of spurs and sabers, and the noise of hurried footsteps. Gendarmes and police were everywhere. The courtroom was empty. The faces of the judges looked tired and haggard. The procurator did not look at us. At the sight of their expressions, the torturous thought, "They will hang him, they will hang him," passed in my mind. Everything grew cold within me. I could hardly stand on my feet. At last the president of the court, an old gentleman, read the verdict. "Nikolai Shpeizman is sentenced to death by hanging. Unknown is sentenced to death by hanging. B. A. is sentenced to 10 years at hard labor." I felt as if a heavy load had fallen off my shoulders. We congratulated the youth and bade him good by. "10 years at hard labor," I said aloud. "You will not have served a year when Russia will be free." The judges looked in surprise at our animated faces, and one gendarme whispered to the other: "They probably did not hear their own sentences." We were led back to our cells. "Is this a death sentence?" I asked myself when I was left alone. "But why is my heart so light? Why don't I feel what is going to be in 24 hours?" I searched all the recesses of my soul. I watched its innermost thoughts and movements, but there was no sign of death. I saw no longer the walls of my solitary cell. I heard no more the stealthy footsteps of the gendarmes. I no longer looked at the indifferent faces of my jailers. There was no death. There were no longer the cruel chains which bound Russia. I was rising higher and higher, supported by thousands of arms. Where am I? Where am I? "Russia is free, free!" some one whispered in my ear. "You did not assassinate any one. That was all a nightmare, a horrible nightmare. Dress yourself, dress yourself." This voice at once roused me to consciousness. " Is it possible that the 24 hours have already passed? " I involuntarily asked the gendarme. " What time is it? "" It is 6 o'clock in the morning," he replied. " Isn't it all the same," I thought to myself, " whether they will hang me a few hours earlier or later? " The sun had not yet risen. And how I wanted to see the sun! " Where will it be? " I asked the gendarme. But he only looked at me with a confused expression and did not answer. Suddenly I remembered the letter I had prepared for my parents. It was my last word to them. I looked around. There was no one but this gendarme. " Listen," I said to him. " I cannot go to the gallows at peace with myself, not having sent this note to my parents. This is the last wish of a woman who goes to die, and you cannot refuse her. Whoever you are, you have or had parents, and must understand their terrible grief." And I pressed the note into his hand. He looked about him, concealed the note, and said, " All right, I will send it. But now I am taking you not to the execution, but to the prison." " They will hang me there," I assured him. Later I found that my parents never received this note. But after all, he was a kind gendarme, because the thought that the parents would receive my last words of consolation gave me much strength, and I would have died happy. In a closed carriage, surrounded on all sides by mounted soldiers, I was taken to the city prison. I was locked in a dark and filthy solitary cell. I shall have to wait here a whole day, I thought to myself. The day passed quickly, and night came. I lay down on the cot without undressing. In alarm, I listened to the footsteps of the gendarmes in the corridor. " Why don't they take me? " I thought. The hours slowly dragged by. Footsteps were constantly heard. Frequently they approached my door, but passed it every time. Finally I fell asleep. When I woke, the sun was high. An uncontrollable joy of life seized me. I felt my hands, my limbs, and the happy consciousness that I was alive, young, and strong, was stronger than the death sentence which hung over me. Every sound I could catch gladdened me. The tiny bit of blue sky I saw through the bars enchantingly drew me toward itself. I paced my cell, and my dreams carried me far beyond the prison walls. A great feeling of life, love of all living, grew more and more within me, and it vanquished death. "They will hang you to night," I tried to argue with myself, but the words seemed meaningless. They could not conquer my belief in life, in all living. My jailers no longer irritated me. There was no more hatred in my heart toward these misguided people. They seemed so far, far away from me. The whole day I was in a state of exaltation, and in the evening I again prepared for death, and waited. Without undressing I lay down, but could not keep awake, and fell asleep. 6 days passed thus in the expectation of death. Every morning I looked in surprise at the bit of sky which calmly regarded me from its azure height. What is it, then? Is it possible that this is death? I wondered. On the 7th day there came a knock on the wall. My heart began to beat joyfully. So I had a neighbor. "Who are you?" I knocked immediately, and there came an answer, clear and unmistakable: "Shpeizman!" "Oh, God!" I exclaimed. "How is that? He is here, and they did not hang him yet?" Soon we were deeply engrossed in conversation. It appeared that he had spent all the time in the military prison, and had just been brought here. "This is the last day?" he knocked. "Yes, I am sure," I answered. We hastened to share all our thoughts and feelings, all that we had lived through in the years of our friendship, unbroken by prison and exile. "I don't want you to die," Nicholai knocked, and the feelings which had been hidden deep in his heart were at this hour of death freely expressed in words. I could no longer stand near the wall. In utter exhaustion I fell on my cot. Hour passed after hour. Night came. There was an unusual noise in the corridor. I held my breath and pressed my hands close to my heart. I heard the door of the adjoining cell open. "They are taking Kolia," I thought. I listened. Some one approached my door. "Farewell, my beloved. Farewell, my dear. Be happy." "Kolia! Kolia!" I cried, but the thick walls drowned my feeble voice. I crouched in a corner and listened. The noise of footsteps grew fainter and fainter and died away. The strokes of a hammer were heard. "They are finishing the gibbet," passed in mind. I leaned against the wall through which Kolya had talked. He was there no more. My heart was painfully compressed, and in the stillness of the night I could hear his dying sigh. Some one stealthily opened my door and entered the cell. "At last!" I thought, and straightening up, turned to face my executioners. It was beginning to dawn, and the little lamp which lighted my cell had grown faint in the light of breaking day. The governor approached and looked in my face without uttering a word. There was something evil in his look. I understood that he had come from the execution. He stood for about 5 minutes and went away. I lay on my cot with my eyes open. A snowstorm was raging outside and knocking at the window bars. The prison clock struck 10. The door of my cell was thrown wide open, and a high official entered. "I have brought you imperial clemency. Your life has been granted to you," he said, and went out. Slowly the hours passed. I lay motionless on my cot, trying to grasp the enormous significance of the fact. But a sudden void had formed within me, and there was nothing but emptiness in my soul. The thread of my inner life had broken, and I now vainly tried to gather the lost ends. End of Chapter 6. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine.